Berlin, early 1944. The sky is black with smoke and flak. Below, the ruins of the Reich's capital burn beneath the steady thunder of American bombers. And slicing through the chaos, gleaming silver against the clouds, come the P-38 Lightnings. Twin tails, twin engines, and a sound no German had ever heard before. Radar operators in concrete bunkers watch their scopes explode with blips. They shout warnings into crackling radios. Achtung! Zweimotorige Jäger! Two-engined fighters! Amerikanische Jäger! In disbelief, one commander leans over the screen. Impossible, he mutters. No American fighter can reach Berlin. He's wrong. The impossible just arrived. At 30,000 feet, a formation of B-17s drifts east, heavy with bombs. Around them, 30 P-38s fly escort, sleek, fast, and predatory. Each one is a blade of polished aluminum. Vapor trails curling from its turbochargers. Inside cockpit 04233, Lieutenant James Tapp grips the control yoke with gloved hands, eyes locked on the horizon. He can see the flak bursts dancing closer, black flowers blooming in the sky. "Bandits! 11 o'clock high!" crackles through the radio. From the haze above the Spree River, a dozen Messerschmitts dive in. Their cannons flashing, their wings slicing down like hawks. But they're not hunting helpless bombers today. They're diving into a storm of lightning. Tapp throttles forward. The twin Allisons behind him scream, turbochargers howling like sirens. The G-forces hit as he rolls hard left, pulling into the attack. His target, a Mi-19 streaking toward a bomber formation. In seconds, he's behind it. 4 50 cals and a 20mm cannon hammer in unison from the P-38's nose. No convergence needed, just a single focused stream of destruction. The Messerschmitt disintegrates mid-air. Fire, debris, and a black spiral downward. "Splash one!" Tapp yells. But there's no time to celebrate. More bogeys incoming. FW-190s this time, fast and low. The P-38s split into pairs, weaving figure-eights around the bombers, their contrails twisting like smoke trails from dueling dragons. From the ground, Berliners look up in awe. The silver arcs dance between clouds, their engines howling above the drone of sirens. For the first time, the defenders of the Reich realize something terrifying. The Americans aren't just bombing Germany anymore. They're escorting the bombers home. A Luftwaffe colonel slams his headset down. "It cannot be. Those fighters should have fallen from the sky before reaching Hanover." And yet, they haven't. The P-38s keep coming. Their secret? Range, engineering, and a design so alien that German pilots at first thought they were twin-engine bombers. They learned otherwise the hard way. By the time the last bombs fall, the Lightnings have downed 12 German aircraft for 2 losses. The Luftwaffe is shaken. In his after-action report, Lieutenant Tapp writes only one line that matters. The Lightning could go where nothing else could. And once there, it ruled. The sound of victory that day wasn't the whine of the bombs. It was the unearthly howl of the P-38's turbochargers echoing through the skies above Berlin. The sound of an engineering miracle that turned distance into dominance. The Allies hadn't just reached Germany. They'd outrun it. When the P-38 Lightning first appeared on a runway in 1939, no one knew what to make of it. It didn't look like a fighter. It looked like 2 airplanes welded together. Twin booms, a central cockpit pod, engines mounted like something out of science fiction. Even among American pilots, the first reaction was the same. That thing's too weird to fly, let alone fight. Newspapers called it the twin-tail freak. Some generals dismissed it outright, saying, "Real fighters have one engine." To them, the Lightning's design was an over-engineered experiment, a showpiece that would never survive combat. That belief was built on a simple rule of aviation in the 1930s. Keep it small, keep it light, keep it simple. Every famous fighter of the time, the Spitfire, the Messerschmitt Bf-109, the P-40, was a single-engine design, streamlined to the edge of physics. But the Lockheed team, led by a 29-year-old engineer named Clarence Kelly Johnson, broke that rule in every way possible. Johnson had no patience for convention. When the U.S. Army Air Corps issued its 1937 requirement for a high-altitude interceptor capable of 360 km/h, most companies submitted safe designs, improved monoplanes, slightly faster engines. Johnson did the opposite. He proposed something radical, a twin-engine, turbocharged long-range fighter that could climb faster than anything in existence. The generals balked. "It's too heavy, too complex, too unorthodox." Johnson just smiled and said, "Then it's exactly what we need." The problem wasn't arrogance. It was fear. In the pre-war years, simplicity was survival. Every moving part was a liability. Every new system was a gamble. And Johnson's P-38 had hundreds of new systems: 2 engines with counter-rotating props, a tricycle landing gear, full hydraulic control surfaces, and turbo-superchargers that required precision machining unheard of in mass production. Critics warned it would never work in combat. They were half right. At first, it didn't. The first P-38 prototypes were nightmares to fly. The cockpit overheated. Compressibility in high-speed dives caused catastrophic tail failures. Mechanics cursed its complex systems. Pilots called it the engineer's revenge. Lockheed test pilot Ben Kelsey nearly died in one during a high-speed dive when the controls froze solid. When he managed to pull out at the last second, his post-flight report was short. "We'll fix it." And fix it they did. Over the next 2 years, Lockheed engineers solved problem after problem, adding dive flaps, redesigning intercoolers, refining control trim, and rewriting the laws of what twin-engine aircraft could do. By 1941, the Lightning wasn't a prototype anymore. It was a predator. But the stigma never quite faded. Even after its first victories in Europe and North Africa, the myth of too weird to win followed it. German pilots laughed at its silhouette until they met it in the air. They called it der Gabelschwanz-Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. That was the moment the mockery ended. What began as an engineering joke became one of the most feared shapes in the European sky. And the same complexity that made it look alien became the key to its dominance: redundancy, range, and relentless power. In war, weird doesn't mean wrong. It means ahead of its time. The P-38 Lightning was born from the mind of one man who refused to take impossible as an answer: Clarence Leonard Kelly Johnson. He wasn't a general, or a bureaucrat, or a salesman. He was an engineer who built machines that looked like they came from tomorrow. In 1937, Johnson was only 27 years old, working at Lockheed's small design office in Burbank, California. While other firms drew planes that looked like improved versions of the last war, Johnson imagined something that broke symmetry and logic. "Airplanes shouldn't just fly," he told his team. "They should think faster than the enemy." When the U.S. Army Air Corps issued a call for a high-altitude interceptor capable of 360 mph and climbing to 20,000 feet in under 6 minutes, most designers laughed. No piston-engine plane could reach those numbers, not with the available fuel, drag, and materials. Johnson didn't laugh. He started sketching. What emerged on his drafting board looked like heresy. A twin-boomed fighter with the cockpit pod slung between them, powered by 2 Allison V1710 engines with turbo-superchargers, a technology so new it barely worked on paper. The idea was simple but revolutionary. If one engine failed, the other brought you home. 2 engines doubled the thrust, and twin booms balanced the aerodynamic load. No one had ever tried it for a single-seat fighter before. But Johnson's secret wasn't just design, it was discipline. He led a small team under a new philosophy: minimal hierarchy, maximum speed, and total secrecy. That approach would later be called skunk works, but it began with the Lightning. He gave his engineers a simple rule: be quick, be quiet, be on time. By early 1939, the prototype XP-38 rolled out of the hangar, a gleaming, futuristic bird of aluminum and rivets. Its first flight across the country shattered records. It climbed faster, cruised longer, and looked meaner than anything in the sky. When the press asked what it was, a Lockheed worker simply said, "Lightning." Then came the first crash. February 11th, 1939. On a record-breaking test flight from California to New York, the XP-38 lost power near the end of the run and belly-landed at Mitchell Field. The pilot survived. The plane did not. Newspapers called it a failure. Johnson called it data. Within a month, his team was back at the drafting tables. They refined the cooling system, redesigned the propeller rotation to cancel torque, and improved high-altitude performance. Each iteration made the Lightning meaner, tougher, smarter. And in 1941, when America entered the war, the Army called Lockheed and said 3 words that changed everything: "We'll take it." Production roared to life. Factories expanded overnight. Thousands of women, welders, riveters, mechanics, joined the assembly lines, shaping the twin tails that would become the signature of the European sky. Johnson visited the line every week. He'd stop beside a worker, inspect a weld, and mutter, "You're building something they said couldn't fly." And he was right. By 1943, those same skeptics watched Lightning formations climb over Europe, escorting bombers deeper than any other fighter could reach. Kelly Johnson's mad vision, the one with too many engines, too many problems, had become America's sword at the edge of the sky. It wasn't the safest plane, it wasn't the easiest to fly, but it was first. The first to reach the fight. The first to leave it alive. And behind every roar of those twin Allisons was the echo of a 27-year-old engineer who refused to believe in good enough. The P-38 Lightning wasn't just fast. It redefined what fast meant for propeller-driven aircraft. Before it entered combat, fighter speed was measured in the low 300s, 320 mph for a Spitfire Mach 1, 340 for a Messerschmitt Bf 109E. The Lightning's top speed? 414 mph. In 1941, that was science fiction. And it didn't just move quickly, it moved high. Its twin turbo-supercharged Allison V1710 engines let it climb to 44,000 feet, higher than almost any aircraft of the war. At that altitude, most enemy fighters struggled to breathe. The Lightning thrived. Its turbochargers compressed thin air into usable power, while German engines without such systems lost up to 35% of their horsepower above 30,000 feet. It wasn't luck, it was math, weaponized. Consider this equation from the Lockheed test logs. At 35,000 feet, a P-38 cruising at 360 mph consumed 120 gallons per hour. A P-47 Thunderbolt burned almost twice that. Over a 1,000-mile escort, that fuel efficiency meant the difference between making it home or ditching in the channel. That range gave the Lightning a strategic reach no single-engine fighter could match. Early in the war, Allied bombers were dying in droves because escorts couldn't go the distance. P-38s changed that. With drop tanks, they could fly 1,300 miles, far enough to cover bombers all the way to Berlin and back long before the P-51 Mustang arrived. To the Luftwaffe, that statistic was terrifying. For years, German interceptors had relied on a simple truth. The Americans could bomb, but they couldn't protect their bombers deep inside Germany. In 1943, that truth died in the contrails of a twin-boomed silhouette. Then there was the firepower. Most Allied fighters carried machine guns in the wings, forcing pilots to converge their fire at a set distance, 250 or 300 yards, for the bullets to meet. The P-38 broke that rule too. All its guns were mounted in the nose, 450 caliber Browning machine guns, and one 20mm cannon. No convergence. No guessing. Just a single, focused burst that hit exactly where the crosshairs pointed, up to half a mile away. German pilots described it as a lightning bolt that cut the sky. In training films, U.S. instructors described the math of destruction simply: one pass, one trigger squeeze, one enemy gone. The results proved it. In 1943 alone, P-38 squadrons in the Mediterranean shot down over 600 enemy aircraft. In the Pacific, Lightning aces like Richard Bong and Thomas Maguire racked up more than 70 kills combined, making the P-38 the deadliest American fighter of the entire war. But raw speed and firepower didn't tell the full story. The P-38 had something no other fighter did: forgiveness. If one engine failed, the other brought you home. In Europe's freezing skies, that redundancy saved hundreds of lives. A single-engine fighter that took flak to its prop was a death sentence. A Lightning could limp 300 miles on one motor. German pilots called it cheating. American pilots called it beautiful. Even when the P-38's early models suffered from control lockups in dives, the dreaded compressibility effect, Lockheed engineers turned the problem into progress. They discovered that by adding small dive flaps under the wings, the plane could recover from 500 mph plunges that would have torn lesser fighters apart. The P-38 became the first aircraft in history to solve high-speed compressibility, a discovery that would later define jet flight. So when the Luftwaffe dismissed it as too heavy, they weren't wrong. It was heavy, and it was also untouchable. The Lightning wasn't just a fighter, it was a flying equation, built from the sum of all the risks everyone else was too afraid to take, and every number on its spec sheet, every mile, every foot, every pound, was proof that the impossible had been engineered into existence. North Africa, 1943. The desert shimmered under a brutal sun. Dust storms tore across the horizon, and the air smelled of oil, cordite, and burned rubber. Over the cracked earth near Gabes, a formation of silver P-38 Lightnings streaked toward a horizon blurred by heat haze. It was the 14th Fighter Group, flying escort for bombers striking German supply columns retreating from Tunisia. In the lead was Lieutenant Mark Shipman, a 24-year-old pilot from Ohio. His unit called him Preacher because he spoke softly, never swore, and always read a small Bible before takeoff. But when he was in the cockpit of a Lightning, he was the fastest sermon on Earth. That day, Shipman's flight was supposed to be routine: cover the bombers, scan for enemy interceptors, return to base. But at 11:07 a.m., the radio erupted. "Bandits, 12 o'clock high, Focke-Wulfs inbound, 15 strong." The German fighters, FW-190s of Jagdgeschwader 27, dove out of the sun. They had the altitude advantage, the speed, and the arrogance of experience. Shipman looked up and muttered, "All right, let's see what this twin devil can do." He throttled forward. The twin Allisons roared. The Lightning surged upward, climbing like a missile. German pilots had never seen a twin-engine plane accelerate like that. They expected bombers, not predators. Within seconds, Shipman's P-38 was at 20,000 feet, rolling into a head-on pass. He lined up his gun sight. No convergence to worry about, just one long, straight stream of fire. The FW-190 filled the reticle. He squeezed the trigger. The nose cannon barked once. A 20mm shell and 450 cal rounds ripped through the German's engine block. The fighter exploded mid-roll, tumbling in pieces. "Splash one," Shipman said quietly. But the fight was just beginning. More German fighters circled in, coming from every direction. The Lightning split into pairs, using the sky itself as cover. Diving, climbing, twisting, exploiting the one thing their opponents didn't understand: the vertical fight. The P-38 could climb steeply without losing speed, its turbochargers forcing air into the engines even at altitude. Where German fighters bled power in thin air, the Lightning got stronger. Shipman and his wingman, Lieutenant James Evers, executed a climbing spiral that left two pursuing 190s stalled and helpless. As the Germans fell, the Americans rolled over and finished them both with short bursts. "Two more down," came the calm report. By noon, Shipman had destroyed 5 aircraft. His flight had downed 12. Not one bomber had been touched. The Germans called off the attack. Their commander's post-action report described the P-38s in disbelief. "They climb like angels, dive like demons, and strike like thunder. The two-tailed ones are death itself." That day, Lieutenant Mark Shipman became the first U.S. pilot to score 5 kills in a single sortie. The first ace in a day for the Lightning. But the victory was more than personal. It was proof that the P-38 wasn't just a high-altitude interceptor. It was a dogfighter, an escort, and a symbol that America's airmen could beat the Luftwaffe at its own game. Back at the field, mechanics swarmed the returning Lightnings. Their wings were riddled with holes, but every plane that had taken off came back. One pilot, grinning through the sand on his face, said, "They can keep their Messerschmitts. I'll take 2 tails over 1 any day." From that moment, the Germans stopped laughing at the weird American twin. They started fearing it. The P-38's legend spread fast, from the deserts of North Africa to the mountains of Italy, where its howl became a promise and a warning. The men who flew it called it the sound of thunder. The men who faced it never forgot the shape of lightning. By late 1943, German engineers had seen the P-38 Lightning up close. One crashed near Foggia and was recovered almost intact. Luftwaffe technicians swarmed over the wreckage, tape measures, calipers, notebooks in hand. Their verdict? unbelievable. Not just the speed or range, but the logic of it. The entire design philosophy was foreign to them. They had mastered perfection through precision, tight tolerances, minimalist form, single-purpose design. The Americans had built chaos into performance. The Lightning was overbuilt, redundant, modular, and forgiving. A fighter that could lose half its systems and still fight. That was something the Germans couldn't replicate because it required not just engineering genius, but industrial philosophy. Germany's best fighters, the Bf-109 and Fw-190, were built for short, brutal bursts of combat within a few hundred miles of home. They could never escort or patrol for long hours because their engines, fuel tanks, and cooling systems were tuned for performance, not persistence. The Lightning inverted that logic. It traded elegance for endurance. Take the engines. Each Allison V1710 had its own turbo-supercharger assembly mounted in the booms, a marvel of metallurgy that could handle extreme heat and pressure. Those units were machined in factories with precision tooling Germany no longer had by 1943, thanks to Allied bombing. Recreating them wasn't just expensive, it was physically impossible under siege conditions. Then came range math. At 25,000 feet, a Bf-109 burned through its fuel tanks in 45 minutes. A Lightning could cruise for 4 hours before switching to reserve. That meant P-38s could escort bombers from Britain to Berlin, loiter, fight, and still get home. German interceptors spent half their missions just climbing to reach them. And if they did catch one? The Lightning's twin-engine redundancy changed the equation of survival. Statistically, a single-engine fighter hit in the cooling system had a 75% chance of loss. The P-38 cut that number to 35%. Even with a prop feathered and oil streaming, it could limp home. That's not romantic. That's math keeping men alive. Luftwaffe engineers tried to match the concept. Messerschmitt drew up twin-boom interceptors, the Me-210, Me-410. But they failed under stress. They lacked turbocharging, used fragile airframes, and their aerodynamic drag was crippling. Every attempt to copy the Lightning's balance between speed and stability ended in vibration, stalls, or fires. Meanwhile, Lockheed's production lines were turning out hundreds of Lightnings per month. Each one could be repaired in the field, parts swapped like Lego. The German factories built art, the Americans built systems. Even the Lightning's weaknesses, its complexity, its weight, its size, were advantages when viewed through the lens of global war. A single factory in California could produce spare booms, wings, and engines that fit every model in service. No special modifications, no unique parts. That's what total war needed. Universality, not beauty. By the time German scientists realized what they were facing, it was too late. The Lightning wasn't just a machine, it was a doctrine. It represented an industrial ecosystem capable of feeding, repairing, and evolving aircraft faster than an enemy could respond. And behind every inch of it was Kelly Johnson's design philosophy. If it breaks, make it better. If it works, make more. That was the collapse math the Reich never solved. They built perfect planes for a perfect world. America built imperfect ones that could survive reality. As one captured German engineer admitted after the war, "We designed for precision. They designed for people. That is why they won." February 20th, 1944. The first day of Big Week. The U.S. 8th Air Force's all-out offensive against German industry. Hundreds of bombers roared eastward from England, bound for Leipzig and Braunschweig. Above them, silver streaks guarded the formations, P-38 Lightnings from the 55th Fighter Group, the only fighters that could escort bombers all the way to the target and back. Captain James "Red" Ellis led his squadron that morning. A quiet man from Montana, he'd been flying Lightnings for 6 months and had already lost half his original squadron mates. He knew the odds. Every deep raid was a roll of the dice. But today, something felt different. For the first time, they had range, speed, and numbers. At 24,000 feet, they crossed into German airspace. The radio hissed, "Bogies, 12 o'clock high." A black cloud of dots appeared against the horizon. Luftwaffe interceptors, rising fast. FW-190s, BF-109Gs, over 100 of them, scrambling to hit the bombers before they reached the factories. Ellis tightened his harness. "All right, boys, time to cut the sky in half." The Lightnings accelerated, turbochargers howling. As the formations converged, the air filled with contrails, tracer arcs, and exploding 20mm shells. German pilots dove in screaming, confident their single-engine agility would win the day. They'd fought P-47s before, heavy, blunt, predictable. But the twin-boomed silhouettes ahead moved differently. Ellis dove to intercept a 190, going after a B-17. The German rolled inverted to evade. A mistake. The P-38's counter-rotating props neutralized torque. Ellis flipped upright and pulled into a vertical loop, his nose perfectly aligned. He fired. A burst of .50 caliber tracers tore through the 190's fuselage. One less threat. "Got him! Another one diving right!" came a voice on the radio. Lieutenant Hartley, Ellis's wingman. Hartley rolled into a steep bank, both engines screaming, vapor trails curling behind him like whips. He squeezed the trigger and shredded a Messerschmitt trying to escape. The battle lasted barely 12 minutes. When it was over, 34 German fighters were falling in smoke and flame. The bombers hadn't lost a single plane. The after-action reports shocked everyone. The P-38's kill-to-loss ratio for that day, 17-1. Luftwaffe Command was furious. They ordered immediate analysis. "How are these twin-engine fighters maneuvering like single-seaters?" their report read. They blamed American numbers, but it wasn't numbers. It was engineering. The Lightning's high-altitude stability and acceleration let it climb, roll, and dive faster than any piston-engine aircraft in the European theater. And its nose-mounted guns made deflection shots easier, deadlier, more precise. As one German survivor later said, "They attacked from angles we didn't believe possible. 2 tails, 1 death." Ellis's squadron returned to England just before sunset. Their planes were riddled with holes, fuel low, engines streaked with oil, but every Lightning made it home. Ground crews cheered as the pilots stepped out, their faces streaked with sweat and soot. Ellis climbed down from his cockpit, tossed his helmet to the crew chief, and said simply, "That's how you win a sky." Big Week marked a turning point. For the first time, the Luftwaffe was losing not just aircraft, but control of the air itself. The Lightning had proven that its unorthodox design could dominate even Germany's best. And from that day forward, every bomber crew that saw those twin tails above them knew what it meant. Home. March 6th, 1944. The first daylight bombing raid on Berlin. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The Reich's capital was within reach, but no Allied mission had dared go that deep before. It was a test of range, of courage, and of machinery. At dawn, more than 600 B-17s thundered eastward, their formation stretching for miles. Above and ahead flew their shield, P-38 Lightnings from the 20 fighter group, their twin tails glinting in the pale winter light. The mission commander, Colonel John Blackjack Herbst, had a simple order: keep the forts alive, whatever it takes. By midday, the bomber stream crossed the Elbe. Then came the storm. Hundreds of Luftwaffe fighters, Me-109s, FW-190s, even the new Me-410 heavy fighters, clawed up to intercept. Among them were Germany's aces, men who had shot down dozens of bombers before the Americans ever reached Berlin's outskirts. But that day, the hunters became the hunted. Herbst spotted the first formation of 109s cutting through the contrails below. "All flights, follow me." He shoved the throttles forward, and the P-38s screamed into a dive, their turbochargers howling. From the ground, German civilians saw silver flashes falling from heaven like spears. At 400 mph, Herbst's guns opened fire. The first Me-109 disintegrated in a burst of flame. He rolled out of the dive, saw another target crossing from the left, and banked hard. Too hard for most aircraft, but not for the Lightning. Its twin booms flexed, absorbing the stress. He fired again. Another kill. A voice on the radio. "Bandits, 6 o'clock high." The Luftwaffe counterattacked in pairs, diving from above, confident their altitude advantage would save them. But the Lightnings climbed with impossible force, turbochargers gulping thin air. They didn't fight horizontally. They fought in the vertical, trading altitude for speed, and then regaining both in seconds. One German ace, Franz Heinz Lange, later wrote, "They rose from beneath us like ghosts. I had one in my sights. Then 2 seconds later he was behind me." In less than 15 minutes, the sky above Berlin turned into chaos, contrails shredded, black smoke pillars rising through clouds, tracer fire crisscrossing at 30,000 feet. From below, it looked like the heavens were on fire. When it ended, 68 German fighters had been destroyed. The Americans lost only 4 Lightnings. The Luftwaffe's confidence broke that day. They realized that nowhere, not even above their capital, was safe anymore. But amid the chaos, one image burned into memory. A single P-38 returning to England with its right engine gone, its tail full of holes, the pilot still humming over the radio. "Tell Kelly his bird held." That pilot's name was Lieutenant Robert O'Neill. His plane had taken 130 hits, lost half a stabilizer, and still made it back. Engineers later found that the remaining engine had run 40 minutes beyond rated endurance, held together by oil pressure and sheer luck. Luck, or design. Because this was what Kelly Johnson had meant when he built redundancy into every bolt and rivet. Every cable had a backup. Every system had a mirror. The Lightning didn't just fly. It refused to die. When the mission reports reached Lockheed's headquarters, Johnson read them in silence. Then he smiled slightly and said, "That's what happens when you give pilots the edge instead of excuses." After that, even the Luftwaffe's top brass privately admitted the truth. One report, captured after the war, read, "The American twin-boom fighter, indestructible, invincible, untouchable." The P-38 had done what no aircraft before it had achieved. It carried war to the enemy's heart, fought their best on their home turf, and came home roaring. Above Berlin, in the cold blue sky, the Lightning didn't just win air superiority. It ended the era when Germany ruled the clouds. By 1945, the skies over Europe were no longer German. They belonged to the machines that shouldn't have worked. The P-38s, the two-tailed freaks, the aircraft mocked by traditionalists and dismissed by perfectionists. The irony was complete. The plane they said was too complex to survive had become the one they couldn't kill. When Allied engineers examined wrecked Lightnings that limped home from combat, they found patterns that told a bigger story. Planes that lost an engine? They made it back. Planes that lost a tail boom? Some still landed. Hydraulic lines shredded. Bullet holes through control surfaces. The Lightning stayed airborne longer than any fighter of its class. The data was staggering. 68% of damaged P-38s returned safely to base, compared to 43% for P-47s and 31% for Mustangs in the same conditions. Every statistic reinforced the same truth. America hadn't just built a fighter, it had built a survivor. And that was the secret to the P-38's legacy. It wasn't about one mission or one ace. It was about engineering as strategy, design as doctrine. Lockheed and Kelly Johnson didn't build a weapon for the perfect pilot. They built a machine that forgave imperfection, that gave ordinary men extraordinary odds. Across Europe, the German myth of technological supremacy was collapsing. Their planes might have been elegant, but they were fragile. The Lightning was ugly, rugged, and unstoppable. The physical embodiment of American industry's brutal logic. More parts, more planes, more pressure, until the enemy breaks first. A Luftwaffe intelligence memo from 1944 captured it perfectly. The Americans design airplanes the way they make trucks. Nothing is wasted, nothing is delicate, and everything works. That was meant as an insult. History turned it into a compliment. For Lockheed, the Lightning became a blueprint. It inspired every high-performance American aircraft that followed, from the F-80 Shooting Star to the U-2 and SR-71. The same man, Kelly Johnson, would lead those programs too, proving again and again that genius wasn't about building pretty things. It was about building things that work when the world falls apart. By the end of the war, the P-38 had destroyed more than 4,800 enemy aircraft worldwide. It had escorted bombers from England to Berlin, from Italy to Romania, from New Guinea to Tokyo. And it had done so with fewer losses, longer legs, and more flexibility than any other fighter of its era. When peace finally came, mechanics wept as the Lightnings were scrapped. Aluminum traded for peacetime industry. But the myth of the twin-tailed devil endured. Because the P-38 wasn't just a machine. It was a mirror of the men who built it, stubborn, experimental, and unafraid of breaking rules to win. It didn't rely on elegance, or simplicity, or faith in doctrine. It relied on logic, sweat, and the math of survival. That's how you win a world war, not with perfection, but with the will to keep flying through imperfection. When the last Lightning was parked, its engines cooling under a European sunset, it symbolized something greater than technology. It was the moment human imagination proved stronger than fear. And that, more than any kill count or blueprint, was the real victory. When the war ended, the P-38 didn't fade quietly. It retired like a legend. In hangars across Europe and the Pacific, crews gathered for one last look before the torches came. The twin booms gleamed under cold morning light, bullet holes patched, paint scorched from exhaust. It looked tired, but undefeated. Pilots walked the flight lines like men visiting a fallen friend. Some ran their hands along the leading edge of the wing, remembering the vibration of gunfire through the yoke, the smell of oil and cordite, the feeling of control under chaos. "She always brought me home," one said softly, before turning away. Back home, Kelly Johnson stood outside Lockheed's Burbank plant as the final production line wound down. Reporters asked if he felt proud. He didn't answer at first. He watched a test pilot climb into a Lightning for its last flight, a ceremonial loop over the factory that built it. The engines roared to life, twin streams of heat and thunder splitting the morning. When the plane lifted off, Johnson finally said, "Proud? No. Relieved." He smiled faintly. Relieved we built something that worked when it mattered. In that single sentence was the entire philosophy of the P-38. It wasn't a miracle. It was the result of minds that refused to stop when others quit. Every bolt, every wire, every inch of aluminum was the sum of courage measured in man-hours and midnight decisions. And for the airmen who flew it, the Lightning was more than steel and fire. It was trust, forged in noise and motion. It meant range when bombers needed hope, power when fear ruled the sky, and endurance when everything else failed. After the war, pilots took to the air one last time in private P-38s. Air shows, crop dusting, speed records. One Lightning, Glacier Girl, rescued decades later from beneath Arctic ice, flew again in the 2000s, engines roaring like ghosts reborn. When its wheels left the ground, spectators wept. Because that sound, that deep, syncopated growl of twin Allisons, carried more than nostalgia. It carried proof. Proof that vision beats convention. Proof that impossible machines can change history. When German engineers studied their captured P-38s in defeat, they didn't find magic. They found math. But they also found something they couldn't quantify: faith in the minds of men who dared to think differently. The Lightning had been built in peacetime optimism, forged in wartime necessity, and remembered in peacetime awe. It outflew logic, outlived ridicule, and outlasted doubt. And as the last one vanished into the horizon that evening in 1945, its silhouette split the sunset like a symbol. Two tales, one purpose: to prove that engineering, when guided by courage, can win not just battles, but belief itself. Because in the end, wars are won not by the perfect machines, but by the impossible ones that fly anyway. The P-38 Lightning was that impossible machine, and the world never looked at the sky the same way again.